Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Chad Nace. I'm married. I have 4 kids between the ages of 13 and 2 months. And we ranch down in southwest North Dakota. We have the Cow Chip Ranch, and then my wife also builds furniture out of reclaimed barnwood, and we remodeled an old barn, to add to our operation. And so to begin with, why is a rancher standing up here talking about financial freedom? That's probably like asking your plumber to give you advice on floral arrangements. I'm not sure, but I'm going to do my best. And to start out, I need to ask everybody why they're here. So whoever's here because of they're intrigued by financial freedom, I want you to raise your hand. And maybe you have it already. I don't know. How many of you are here because you want to justify your belief of how you feel about your banker? Good. All right. Okay. So we'll move on then. And so when we talk about finances, we talk about financial freedom. To me, financial freedom isn't debt-free. To me, financial freedom is being able to make the decisions I need to make to best benefit my family, my operation. So now I got another question for you. I got a couple quotes here, and I want you to tell me, raise your hand if you believe the quote. If you have a gun, you can rob a bank. If you have a bank, you can rob everyone. Bill, that's a quote by Bill Maher. That's probably the only thing I enjoy about him. But anyway, I thought that was kind of interesting. And how many of you believe the quote by Will Rogers, who said, "The quickest way to double your money is hold it over and put it back in your pocket"? Yeah, that's me. My biggest pet peeve is spending money. My second biggest pet peeve is making money, because unless the value, the money does not really have value. It's what we do with the money that has the value. So when we start looking at the value of money, and I'm not going to bore you with any beautiful pictures of green grass and cattle and cover crops, or even kids playing with animals. I'm going to talk about the hard parts of our operation, which is the people part and the financial part. But why is the financial part so tough for us? When I talk about how many marriages end in divorce because of financials, how many operations go bankrupt because of financials? That's a trick question, every one of them. So when we look at, we have to ask the why question. Why is it so tough? Why do we avoid it so much? And I think to answer those why questions, we first have to know what our goals are. What do we want out of life? Is our goal to make as much money as we can and accept whatever shows up, or do we have a roadmap in place to know what we want to do with our money, how we want to spend it, where we want to invest it, things like that. So until we have our quality of life outlined, so we know where our goals are, where we want to go, it's kind of tough. And so we need to manage for what we want, not what we don't want. Okay, so to illustrate that, I want to tell a little story about my daughter. Molly. She's 3 years old. And anyway, I don't know, getting too deep here. No, but she's the one that always wants to go check cattle. So one day I had to go out and check the cow-calf pairs, and I ran out there and I sent my father-in-law out to roll up some polywire for the yearlings, and I was driving by the pasture he was in, and I looked out and he was rolling up the polywire, and the four-wheeler was driving behind him, and I'm like, geez, that it looks too small for my boys. And I'm like, he can't be letting my 3-year-old daughter drive that four-wheeler, because this guy is very overprotective. But anyway, I got home, the boys are there, and pretty soon Mike and Molly come driving in, and Molly comes walking up to the house. I'm like, hey, Molly, you got to help your grandpa check cows today. She's like, yeah. And he let you drive the four-wheeler? Yeah. I hit a tree. It was in my way. And I mean, how many times do we do that as people? We focus so much on what we don't want, that it becomes a problem. And so, one thing, you guys have never had conversations with your neighbor that involve the weather and the markets and the government? Have you? Okay. All right. Well, good for you. Because Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People talk about our circle of concern, and how many things are in that circle of concern that we spend time thinking about, talking about, dreaming about. And inside that circle of concern, we have the circle of influence that we actually can do something about. And that kind of defines, that circle of influence defines the difference between reactive people and proactive people. So we want our point of setting these goals is to get to the point where we are focusing on our energy on what we can change, what we can affect, what we can influence, rather than what we can't control and what we want to blame things on. So once we understand our goals in life, then we have to start looking at our resources, our land, our people, what is available. I mean, not only what we want to do out there as far as putting cows or land, things like that, but the whole spectrum. You know, when somebody asks you how many acres you have, do you include everything as deep as in the ground? You can go down to oil, water, gravel, to the sky, the air, the scenery. I mean, we have so many assets that we need to take into account when we start figuring the value of our resources. And when it goes to borrowing money, they don't just give you money, do they? They want collateral, and not all collateral is treated equally, right? So it's good to know what you have, what it's worth, and what you're willing to do with it. So if we have our goals, we have our resources, then we look at the value of our product. How many people know the value of your product? Bud Williams said, when you wake up, if you have a herd of cattle, when you wake up every single morning, you look out the window, you just bought those cattle. Was that a good investment for the day, or wasn't it? I was talking to a couple bankers, and I asked them, when you borrow money to these guys, what kind of marketing plan do they have? Most of them, nobody has marketing plans, unless they're in a marketing group and somebody does their marketing for them. But a lot of them, they said, how we help them market, we call them and tell them it's time to pay off your debt. And they force them because, you know, the bankers cannot tell them when to sell. So if we know what the value of our product is, and we know what we want out of life, we can match those two and sell those when we're at the point where they're going to match our profit, what we want out of them. So another thing is, like in farming, we ask, when we talk to the neighbor, we say, how many bushels the acre did you get off that field? They're pretty eager to tell you, aren't they? Have you ever asked your neighbor, how many dollars of profit did you make off that field out there? Or how many dollars per acre did you make off that, you know, your cows? So so it's very important to know the value of that, because I look at the value of your product, the value of your resources as our vehicle. So we have our roadmap with the quality of life. We have our vehicle, which is our resources to help us get to where we want to be. So then that leaves the fuel. That's the finances. That's the money to help generate all this stuff. So when we look at, I'm sure a lot of you have seen this. You know, we have our overhead costs, we have our direct costs, and I was going to bring a soapbox and stand on it right now, because this is the direct costs and some overheads is real where I really get worked up, because there's so much. When you open up magazines, you look at how many ads are for things to add production. There isn't much that says here, help us, we're going to help you to be more profitable. So when you start looking at, say, adding fertilizer or giving cattle a shot or all these things that research comes out and says, you know, for every dollar that you spend, you're going to return $1, $2, $3, $4, $5 worth of profit. What they don't take into account, and why it doesn't ever seem like it works, is that they do not count the overhead costs, the amount of labor it takes to implement those direct costs, the amount of, if you have to go buy machinery or tools, the facilities and the upkeep. So when you start looking at adding that tool to help increase production, we need to look at the total cost of what that's adding to our operation, and whether it is or not. So when we start adding direct costs, is that helping our operation, or is that adding more risk? And that's the one thing that frustrates me, because there's so many companies out there wanting us to buy our products, adding more risk to our operation with no accountability. It's our own fault. But we need to start looking at that closer. And then they come out and say, because you have all this risk, here's another tool to help you manage your risk. So we get into this cycle where it's just so hard to get out of it when we don't know where our production is, what the value of our production is, and when to say that's enough, it's time to sell, or let's hold on, take more risk, see if that market will increase. So it's up to us to understand where that is. So when you look at this here, that's a profit, right? I gave you the answer. So what's this down here? Loss, or what's it called in ranching and farming? Normal, right? Okay. How many people talk about break even? versus break profit. Bert Teckert, I was reading an article on his of his, and he was talking about for $1 of input, we should figure to generate at least $1 of profit, and try to figure 2, because we are so bad at understanding the value of things that we underestimate all the time. So we really need to look at, when we're investing those dollars, if we're really going to get the return, or if it's just being reactive and trying to throw something in there just because somebody said that might happen. So when we look at this chart and we look at, okay, how can I increase my profit? What are some ways? Okay, time to wake up. Any input? Cut costs, cut overhead costs. Okay, what else? Okay, you can sell at a higher dollar, but it doesn't really matter how high that you sell that product for if your your direct costs increase. So direct margin is a gross margin is your gross product minus your direct costs. So that we need to increase that. The other is turnover. How fast we turn that over, how many units we have on our operation, or how many different enterprises we can stack on that operation to basically spread those overhead costs out to make everything more profitable. You know, and when you look at that overhead costs, we figure overhead costs is kind of just a broad cost that, you know, we have to have this, we have to have that. But we can break down those overhead costs a little more and look at if there's certain equipment, if there's certain things that money is, or that overhead cost is going more towards one enterprise versus another, and then being able to say, okay, if I eliminate that enterprise, or if I do something with this enterprise, will that change the total overhead? Do I need that product or that piece of machinery just for one part of the aspect? So like for haying, if I cut out haying, would that cut out tractors and balers and swathers, or do I hold on to all that and spread that cost over my whole operation? So being able to understand those overhead costs and knowing where the majority of that cost is going is very important too. So let's see. So like you were saying with increasing the cost, you know, the cost of production is more important than the production itself. I mean, we all know that, but how hard is it to do that? Especially when you watch your neighbors do everything they're doing and think, if I don't do that, how do I keep up? So now we have all these costs, we got our production. What do we do with that? This is kind of what I use to break my numbers down. I'll let you guys hand it out. You can't see me quite as good. Maybe look a little bit confusing, but what do we usually do in agriculture? We start out at the beginning of the year, and we hope at the end of the year we have some money that we at least broke even. We have some money that, you know, maybe we can pay a little debt, maybe we can go on vacation or buy a new tractor. If we got too much money, God darn it, then we gotta figure out what to buy so we don't have to pay taxes, right? So why don't we look at this a little different? You know, why don't we start over here? What do I want to make? What is my goal? Do I want to end the year with $100,000 of profit, or do I want to break even? I don't really. I'm to the point where I don't want to break even anymore because I'm not ranching for the experience. I think I've had enough. So if we start out first of all with our profit, okay, then we look at our overheads because a lot of those are fixed. I mean, we need to pay ourselves something, or our hired men. We need to run a household. We have vehicles. We have our we got to put fuel in them. We got to pay for everything. There's certain things that, maybe you can get rid of a vehicle or something like that. But a lot of that stuff, we need to look at it objectively and say, is this helping our operation or not? If it's not, get rid of it. But it's the why question. Why is it there? Second of all, you got your land. That's pretty important. So what it takes to keep the land and what it takes to make improvements. And this is very important because when it comes to managing your land, when it comes to increasing production and increasing management, we run into issues with water, with fencing, things like that. So we need to have something in there to be able to make those improvements to help the whole operation. So this helps break it down to know what our overhead costs are, what are the costs that we need to just make the operation work. So then on top, we start looking at our direct costs, and that is based on per unit. So the more you have, the more it costs. And so we start out. Let's start out up here on what's marketing. Marketing, it includes our sales and our change in net worth, because you're going to have, so it's cattle, you're going to have a different amount of calves or bred cows or stockers or whatever, the beginning of one year to the end of that year. So, and that's what I have on your, and I'm not going to cover it on the slide, but on those handouts on the back page of that one, there's that's basically the form I use for inventory. So you can put all the value of your animals, and you want to keep the value kind of constant so that it's pretty easy to add. I do that whenever I want to feel good about myself. I go talk to a banker, and he tells me how much I'm worth, and I'm like, yeah, no, it'd be great. But I've kept my like my bred cows, I've kept those, the value of them the same. So it probably makes my net worth look lower, but going from one year to the next, I don't want to, add any false ideas that I just added $300 per cow and therefore I added $60,000 to my operation. That would be nice, wouldn't it? So we have to know how much we made and what we have left, and then we take out our production costs, our breeding, our replacements, things like that, and then we start looking at our direct costs, and these are things that I've learned to take out of my program, and we've cut a lot of costs, and actually our production has went up because we started looking at our direct costs as how are they affecting our resources rather than how are they affecting our production. Because if I'm borrowing from my resources to add production, when am I going to be able to use that money to put back to replace the resources, especially if I'm only breaking even? So that's when you start looking at these direct costs, you know, porons, chemicals, things like that, that are either killing our diversity or taking out beneficial bugs in our environment, wildlife, things like that. Are we really positively impacting our production, or is it short term? So as you can see, like with feed, I broke it down into supplement versus substitute. Does everybody know what I'm talking about there? I mean, there's deficiency versus replacement. I don't think a lot of people understand that, and I think that's where it's easy to stick all those cattle in a feedlot and feed them and control everything. So that's important. I have interest. I have it in red there because we can look at this as an opportunity cost. We can look at whether we need to borrow money to help our production without hurting our resources, or we can try to eliminate having to borrow money and to use just what we have. So on this slide, you'll see the percentages, and the percentages are just kind of like benchmarks, things to shoot for, and that helps you when you start taking each part of this graph and looking at those percentages. Then you can kind of see where am I lacking? Where do I need to make improvements? And those percentages are based on the beginning inventory that you put together on the back of that sheet. So is there any questions? Any comments? Actually, I got that from Roland Cruz. Josh, do you have anything like this? Yeah. Usually it's through holistic management.
Chad is actually the first person to introduce this format to me, but those percentages and stuff, they come from managing profit and holistic management. That's something similar. It's set up a little bit differently. But what I really like about this is the fact that those percentages come from about 20% of the ranches that are involved in a financial program like this. So that benchmarking part to me is really helpful because it gives me a bit of an idea of where we might not be. Not that there is in this situation.
Yeah. So like with our operation too, this top part here with the gross margin, this is we have a separate branch for each enterprise on our operation. So this part right here is duplicated every time we add an enterprise. So we can isolate each enterprise to see how profitable it is. You know, your overheads are going to pretty much stay the same, but you can look at your gross margin on each enterprise and compare them and see where your energy is going, rather than one enterprise helping pay for another. Subsidizing, that's the word I was looking for, which I won't get on wind towers. But the other thing too with our operation, when it comes to say government payments or off-farm income, things like that, we'll put that separate. I might even make a line right over here, put that in, because I want say the cow-calf part of our operation, I want that to stand alone. I don't want the government paying for it. I don't want Amanda's business paying for it. I don't want to have to go out and preg check a couple thousand cows just for my cows to survive. It needs to stand on its own. So I guess that's kind of what we use. And you know, when we sit down and put our budget together, we really scrutinize or ask why. Instead of looking back and say, okay, I spent $1,000 last year on supplement, I spent $10,000 on vet. We break that down. Why? Why was it $10,000 on vet? Well, let's see. We gave 3 shots. Each shot was worth this much. We had this many cows. Our preg testing was worth this much. So it makes you be accountable for your expenses rather than just lumping them together and saying, I got this much I can spend. And it's easy to start cutting out costs when we do that. So we'll detail that. We have spreadsheets where, where you have your, the budget, and then put the actuals in and track yourself through the year. Let's see. With this planning, I think the biggest thing is it's not the plan itself, it's the planning that helps you get to where you want to be. It's the process that helps you understand why you're doing what you're doing. So now when we get, now that we've covered that, we look at that comment, my beginning slide about our banker being a tool. So Bob Holt made this quote. He said, "A bank is a place that will lend you money if you can prove you don't need it." So that's where we need to be. We need to prove to the bank we don't need it. So we can create him to be the tool we need him to be, rather than him dictating to us. So I think that, when you look at our goals and our resources, that's our holistic context, and everyone is different, and everyone needs. So there isn't a magic wand. It's being able to look at things objectively and not take them too serious. So I guess with that, I got one more slide. So I'm not implying anything here, but how many people are driving, farmers or ranchers that drive around like that, won't even spend money to put a new tire on, that are probably worth a lot of money, versus those brand new equipment that's driving down the road. So he's even, I shouldn't say this, but I mean, that guy's even using his wife as a tool. She seems to be enjoying it though. So yeah. So anyway, any questions, any comments?
When you started this, what major changes did you make in your operation?
I started looking at our resources first, trying to focus on regenerating a resource versus focusing on production. Because as you improve your resources, your production improves. But the quality of your product also improves. I mean, when we went to more intense grazing, we not only increased the amount of grass we were growing, we also increased the quality of grass we were growing, which also helped the quality of animals we produced. And that was, but it's like I said earlier, it was taking things out that weren't helping our resource. And it was short-term thinking. So that's probably the biggest things. So how are we doing on time? 10 minutes. Any other questions?
When you do your planning, how far up do you plan?
We just do 1 year. Yeah. Spring of 2012, we had a holistic management group or council. There was 4 of us families, and we'd get together, and we had a coordinator, rolling crews, and we that year we had, in the previous few years, we went in detail into our finances, marketing, grazing plans, goal setting. So the spring of 2012, we got together and we put together a comprehensive drought plan. So we put together a grazing a grazing, what I call it, not dead end grazing plan, but basically a grazing plan. So, say you had one of the worst droughts in history, and there's no hay available, no more extra grass available. So you look at what you have available to you as far as land, cattle, feed, and then you can basically look at what it would take to get from a full year, say from July 1 to June 30th, without bringing in any help. So matching your production to your to the resources you had. So we did that, and then we set it up so each month we had guidelines. So each month we knew we went out in inventory. If it hit a certain benchmark, we made these decisions. We did these steps. We did that also with the financial plan to put this financial plan together. And if things started going south, this is what we were going to do to keep our finances under control. And then we also did that with the marketing. We looked at what we had for cattle, what we wanted for a profit, and then, and looked at where throughout the year what the value of those animals should be, so we knew when to market them. And that was the least stressful drought that I'd ever went through, because there was no emotion involved. I'd go out, I'd look at the cattle, I'd look at the grass, I'd monitor, I'd evaluate, I'd look at our goals that we had set for that month. We were still within range. Let's go another month. Next month, no, we're under here on our grass. Okay, what can we do? Oh, it says let's sell some cows. Let's sell some yearlings. Down they went. The thing is because of that, we sold our calves at the end of June, and we were calving in mid-May or mid-April. So we sold our calves mid-June or late June, and after that the market went like this. And I went with the buyer I went with. I told him, I said, I want to try to make it till the 30th of September because I want to hit 500 pounds. But I'll only go with you if you'll give me the flexibility to go with those cattle earlier, if I can. He said, no problem. We sold them on the 20th of September. They weighed 490. And there was a lot of like I said, it was very stress-free, but there was a lot of people that get hurt because they couldn't make those decisions, so they kept adding more costs, adding more risk, waiting for the price to come up, and then it cost them. So I think that's where a lot of this planning, if it's all put together, can be such an impact. And to be able to take that emotion out of it, to be able to just make those decisions, because how rational decisions do we make when we're controlled by fear? So I guess that's where we became believers in all this stuff.
You monitor the markets then. I mean,
yeah, we'll watch the markets, but we can only control the markets so much. So if I know how much money I need out of those calves to hit my profit goal, and if they hit those at a certain time, now it's my decision whether I want to take that or if I want to add more risk and play the market and see if that price comes up. Then that's my choice. But to sit there holding on for that top dollar, you'll never get it. But if you know what you want, it's easier to aim at that bullseye when you know where it's at. So if you don't want to do this, that's fine with me. There's always the second option that you can get an off-farm job. I just caution you, you got to be a little bit careful on what you want for off-farm jobs because I hear electricians have to strip to make ends meet. Oh, and I got one other thing. This is from our bank. And my dad told me he went to the Allen Xavier School back in the 1900s. that's what my boys always say. So back in 1986, and he was sitting at a table, it was a long day, and I don't know, did you ask him a question or something? Yeah. And he looked at my dad and he's had a ABS cap on and he says, "What, use your head for thinking and not advertising?" And that's, think about profitability. Why aren't we changing? Why aren't we charging companies for their use of our billboards? So anyway, but with that, that's all I got.